Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be re-lent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a micro-lender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm speaking to Ron Schneebaum. He's a medical doctor, a pediatrician who was in practice for over 40 years. He was a diplomat of the American Board of Pediatrics and a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Also served on the clinical faculty of Dartmouth College School of Medicine, where he established a program, Fresh Perspective, to help children and teens with behavioral, psychological, emotional, and school issues. The Dartmouth medical students he taught voted him best teacher in pediatrics. After a career of helping his patients and families live better lives, he retired from clinical practice to teach a larger audience what he learned about happiness, living fully, and being ourselves. Ron, how are you?
I am excellent, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to it. I feel like we should have been recording the conversations we already had.
Exactly.
Well, listen, you've listened to the show quite a bit, so you know what I'm going to ask you. What is your favorite style of music?
So I was thinking about that. An interesting thing for me is I grew up in the old glory days. I grew up in the late 50s listening to early rock and roll and watching that switch to heavy rock and roll. So watching the Beatles go from She Loves You to Sgt. Pepper and being a part of that. And then there are all other kinds of influences. There was a folk music scene, the doo-wop scene where small groups got together and sang. And so it's great. So I had all of that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, what's your favorite song and why?
I guess I would have to say the Beatles' Good Day Sunshine.
Okay.
It just kind of matches how I feel about life.
Well, listen, you have over 40 years of experience as a medical professional, working with children and families, and obviously that can be really stressful. But obviously you've done some really great things throughout your career that's helped you become successful. What would you say are some of the critical things that allowed you to become successful in your career?
Probably the most important is the way that I got into medicine.
Okay.
I had absolutely no thoughts of going into medicine at all. My family background was interesting in that my parents never took me to a doctor. I didn't go to yearly physicals. I wasn't sick as a kid. I hardly went to a doctor.
Wow.
Yeah. I also was a lackluster at the best kind of student as a kid.
Okay.
For example, so I never did homework. I never studied for a test. I actually stopped reading in 5th grade. Wow. I finished the last of the baseball biographies that I wanted to read and the books by my favorite authors, and there was nothing left, so I stopped. I remember the day at the library looking at the gray shelves and seeing that, nope, I read Roberto Clemente's biography. I finished.
Right.
And when we had books assigned in school, I didn't do them. When we had book reports, I made them out of the inside front cover, and what was written on the inside front cover. And I remember in my English class in high school, we had our final exam was on A Tale of Two Cities. And I never read it, and I wouldn't read the cliff notes either. And so I didn't think about it until I was sitting in my seat and the teacher was handing out the test booklets. And I thought, holy cow, I could fail this thing. My whole life will be ruined. Because at the same time, it was assumed I was going to college.
Right.
And in the beginning of the class, I could listen to most of what she said about the book up until the middle of the book. And there was a character named Madame Defarge. And I remember sitting as the booklets were handed out, thinking, if she doesn't ask about Madame Defarge, I'm going to fail this course. And almost the whole test was about Madame Defarge. That was great. So at any rate, that didn't change until I had a teacher in high school who saw sleeping potential in me. He kind of woke me up.
Right.
But that still didn't make me a student yet. His final exam in the class was to tell him what to tell the commissioner of the Board of Education in New York about education reform, because he was meeting with him that next week.
Oh, wow.
And I drew stick figures of children holding hands interspersed with peace signs on my booklet. And this is the guy who changed my life, and he gave me an A. At any rate, with that as my background, I was a school teacher. I did a master's in education. I traveled and worked in a logging camp in Alaska. I was working in Manhattan in a newspaper advertising related business when I was sitting on a park bench one day, and an ad fell out of the newspaper and onto my lap. And this ad described a pre-med program that was at Columbia University for people that want to go to medical school, that graduated from college, and that didn't have the math and science background they needed to get into medical school. Ad just struck me, and I closed my eyes, and an image came to mind. I pictured someone having a heart attack, and the person was probably in their late 40s. And I imagined that this person would want to have a great physician to take care of his heart disease.
Right.
But then I also imagined that he'd have questions about who he is. What do I do with my life? How do I go forward? What do I tell my family and friends?
Right.
And I thought those questions would be as important for him. And he wouldn't see a psychiatrist. He would talk to the person who diagnosed him.
Right. Doctor's doctor.
When I saw medicine as a possibility of it being intellectually challenging and having this interpersonal side, I said, that's what I wanted to do.
Wow.
And yeah, so I had to get straight A's to get into medical school. And I taught myself how to study. I was like, it was new. So one of the things I did, we had a biology class, and I got an A- on the first exam. I thought I need better than that. So it was in a large auditorium, and the professor came in and lectured for 90 minutes. And there were no recordings and no transcripts. I didn't know what he said. So I listened as hard as I could. And then I would try to take notes while I was listening, but listening was more important to me.
Right.
And then when the class emptied out, I sat by myself and closed my eyes and reviewed the lecture backwards. So I said, okay, we did the flower before the flower came the bud and so on. And then I borrowed somebody's notes to fill it in. So I had gone over it 3 times already.
Right.
And then I could only sit at my desk and memorize for so long. So everything I still needed to learn, I put into a form of a question in a spiral notebook. And then I walked up and down the streets of New York talking to myself. And if I knew a question, I would cross it out. If I didn't, I would circle it and go over it later. So that's when I became convinced that everybody who talks to themselves in Manhattan is really studying for a final exam.
I lived in Manhattan. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Oh, so at any rate, the reason I say that is I carried that through my career.
Yeah.
And I realized that first, what I wanted to be was the best pediatrician possible. And for that, I had a picture of what parents would want as a good pediatrician. So I had to be good at my sciences. And then I thought that the other part was to address who they are as people.
Right.
And so that came a lot of ways. It came in one way where I realized from the day I went into medical school, I was learning terminology and medical information my friends didn't know about. And so I was committed to, how do I explain this to people and put it in terms that anybody could understand.
Right.
And that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then I always felt that I was addressing the person, not the illness.
Right.
And so I talk to medical students, and we do things like, before we go into a room, I would say, this person has such and such a problem. What do you think they would be worried about? What would you be worried about if you had that?
Mm.
And then I would talk about how medically, what do we need to check on? What do we need to make sure is okay, and so on. And then I remember there was one time I did this with a child who was hospitalized, and the parent then asked the questions that we had said they would ask in the exact order we had asked them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what happens that way is that it becomes the person you're treating.
Right.
So I could see 7 kids with ear infections, but they're all completely different, because it's, how do I discuss what's going on with each one of these people where they can appreciate, I've got their back, I'm thinking of their kid, and we're doing the right thing.
Right. Right.
And the reason I say that is that fits in with everyday life.
Yeah.
If we could imagine, suppose you meet someone, or you're going to go and meet someone you haven't seen in a while, you think for a while, instead of reviewing their chart, like, who are they? What are our connections? What's important in our lives? What are the kind of things I might want to touch on in our conversation? And to think, I'm really there to meet this other person.
Right.
It's like finding the pheasant inside the wrapping paper.
Right.
If we do that with our relationships, if we do that when we go to work, if we do that with our families, we'll have great relationships and we'll enjoy life more.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I can hear you and I can feel you, because I can feel the emotions and your genuineness, that as you share those different experiences, you can hear just how engaged with that particular person, and that throughout your career, it really rings to me that you focus so much more on the person than on the illness, and that the illness was kind of like the thing that got treated, but the person that got respected and the person that got really taken care of was who that person was and what their family was going through, and that the illness exposed things that were going on that they needed to also work through. And as you probably know, as you work on some of these emotional and verbal and neurological concepts, the body begins to heal itself, or the things that are going on with the body. Again, I think, I shared in the beginning when I first did this podcast, I shared with you earlier as well, I had this, the vertigo and the vestibular imbalance. And after going through all the doctors and getting it treated and so on and so forth, and doing my own research and going through neurological therapy and so on, I discovered that a lot of it was stress related. And I had a lot of stress in my life at that time. And so I've spent the latter 5 years of my life, as I've been doing this podcast and other things that I've been doing, really learning how to de-stress and work on me. And
that's fascinating.
My health got so much better, right?
Yeah. And if we think when we have an illness, is there something we should be learning out of it? It doesn't mean there always is.
It's like our body's telling something.
Yeah.
It's like disease. A disease is really a dis-ease of the body, and the body is saying, hey, something is not right, not so much physically, but mentally and emotionally. Something's not right, and I'm going to be out of order until you get that right. But once you work on that, you'll begin to correct the things that are going on with you physically. That's what I've experienced.
Yeah, and there are many things that happen. There was a mom in my practice, I described this in my book. There was a mom in my practice who had 2 young children and told me she was leaving her husband.
Mm.
And I said to her, that's pretty unusual. Women stay in bad relationships for a very long time. Right. Your children are young. What made you decide to leave? Well, it turns out she had a significant medical problem right after the birth of one of her children.
Right.
After her younger child. And she ended up being in and out of coma.
Mm.
And so here she is in the ICU going in and out of coma. And she said people would come to her and tell her to get better and to cheer up, be strong, you'll get better. And she realized at one point that she didn't want to get better.
Mm.
And then she thought, wow, what's this about?
Right.
So she took an inner look. And again, she's comatose practically.
Right.
So she took this inner look to see what's this about. And she realized that her husband was abusive. And he wasn't violent yet, but she was pretty sure he would be.
that he's
And
going.
she realized the reason she didn't want to get better is because of this relationship. And she realized she had to leave.
Right.
And she told me later she had no doubt in her mind that this event was to open her eyes.
Wow. Yeah.
But there were so many different things. And another one that happened, my daughter once, when she was about 8,
right.
said to me, Dad, how come this illness? And words came out of my mouth that I hadn't planned on. I couldn't believe I said it. But I said, without illness, there wouldn't be compassion.
Hmm.
So we have no idea what angle, and why we're in this situation.
Right.
But we can look and learn and see.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really important to think about all of that you're saying and all the examples, because I think, when someone is going through something physically or an illness, it's really a way, again, that the body is trying to say something's not right or you're out of balance. For me, it was with the vestibular. It was like, not only physically did I get out of balance, but my body was telling me that, hey, your life is out of balance.
Yeah, that's very interesting. To have that is such a gift.
Exactly. But being able to recognize it and then step back and do what they say when you're on a plane. Hey, in the case of emergency, put your mask on first.
Exactly.
Right? Put your mask on first. So then once you are able to deal with yourself, you're able to then go and help others. If you are not, things are still not right with you, it's really hard to get right and help others. I want to jump into your book, Bigger Hearted. I like that title, A Retired Pediatrician's Prescription for Living a Happier Life. In this book, you talk about cultivating a bigger heart, right? How do you think emotional well-being and happiness directly impacts someone's productivity in their personal and their professional life?
Well, let's jump to the productivity side.
Okay.
And so it's not exactly the fullness of your question, but I was thinking to myself that if we take a look at why people aren't productive,
right.
First, if somebody really enjoys their life, they'll be productive.
Right.
Like the two fit together. So if somebody's not productive, there's something going on where they're not quite engaged.
Exactly.
So then I think there are 3 steps. The first part is to think about, why am I in this job? It could be I'm in this job because I can pay my bills and this is what I got to do.
Right.
It could be that you're in this job because it's a stepping stone to a great career, or it could be the career that you love.
Yep.
So with that part, then that kind of sets the stage for the next parts. The next parts are saying, on the one hand, if I work here, what kind of worker would I be that my colleagues would want to have?
Right.
What would I want in a colleague? So if I thought about that, and I think I'd want somebody who works hard, somebody who's engaging, somebody who's caring, somebody who's a nice person to be around, and they carry their load, and we enjoy work together because we work side by side.
Yeah.
So if we each picture what do we think would make for a good workmate, and then say, and I'm going to be that.
Right.
Then the other side is to say, in my job, I also have interactions with people. How is it that I can be so each person I interact with is happier that they met me than before they did?
Right.
If I engage that way, I'll work hard and I'll enjoy work.
Exactly. And I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about, the COVID incident that we all experienced around the globe, and how, as that went on, people began to leave their jobs because being sequestered, if you will, in your home or away from others, and being in that situation gave everyone a chance to sit down and think, right? And they had to assess, like, wait a minute, what am I doing with my life? I've been working this job and I hate it, or I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I don't like it. And they were able to, many people made a decision that I'm not going to live like this. I want to live a better life. I want to do something I enjoy. I want to do something I have a passion about. And as you said, when you find something that you love to do or that your heart's in, you will become productive and you will become effective in making a difference, because at the end of the day, no one ever sits on their deathbed and talk about the hours they spend in the office.
Yeah.
They talk about the loved ones that they spent time with, the people they helped, the memories they created, the things that they did that made a difference in other people's lives. And so if that's the case, then why not start living that way now? Right.
Yeah. And you can do that at the workplace. You can say, how do I help my coworkers enjoy work more?
Exactly.
It might be thinking about something I want to tell them, or something I occurred of, or something that occurred to me, or in many ways, what niceties can I do? Like, how do I make it so they're glad I'm there?
Exactly.
It makes such a difference.
Exactly.
I had a friend who was the head of a major mental health center.
Mm-hmm.
And when COVID hit, he thought, wow, these people aren't trained to work at home and do therapy from home.
Right.
So he said to himself, I wonder how they're doing. So he decided to call them all up and ask how they are. And it even meant staying up for the emergency folks at night and talking to them about how they're doing.
Right.
And he just went out of his way for that. And that can't help but make people around him think, wow, I want to work for this guy.
Exactly. Well, when you care more about the person than just about getting the job done, the job will get done, but the person will be engaged, right? They will be totally engaged, because people really respond to when they know that they're being cared for and they're being treated with respect. So let me ask you this, as a experienced pediatrician, obviously you've likely faced a lot of high stress situations. How do you manage to stay productive while maintaining a compassionate and patient-centered approach? And how can others apply those principles that you've learned?
You ask a big question, because it's a stressful job. And so the only thing you can do is know that I'm well trained and go over the medical part of it as best I can.
Right.
And then in each situation, be the best I can be in that situation. And then while I do that, to not forget that the people that I'm with are also influenced by how I am.
Right.
So for me to not forget them and be with them. So if I can do my best in whatever situation it is, explain to the people that are going on what's going on. If it turns out it's a situation that needs a referral or needs extra care, to make sure I do the follow-up in the proper way so they feel cared for. And so I could leave each room thinking I can close the door on this case.
Right.
I went away once with some cousins, and they were both lawyers, and they were amazed that I didn't have to call my office. I had people that were covering for me, and I knew that with each person that I saw, I had an assessment of what's going on, a plan for how to treat them, and follow-up.
Right.
And if none of that worked, they also had access to how to get back into the situation.
Right.
So let me answer your question in a different way. One of the ways that I find is a great stress reliever, and this is available for everyone.
Okay.
And it has to do with when you wake up in the morning.
Okay.
So if you set your alarm clock, set it for about 10 or 15 minutes earlier than you need to get up. And when you turn your alarm clock off, don't look at your notifications and so on.
Right.
And close your eyes and then picture the day ahead.
Mm.
And picture it in three ways. The first one is a kind of a helicopter view where you just get a sense of what's going on. After I get out of bed, I'm going to have breakfast and I'm going to work. And then I have a meeting at lunchtime and I'm going to the gym after work and so on.
Right.
Then do a more specific view of the day ahead. So my wife left early this morning. I'm going to be feeding the kids. We have bagels and we have oatmeal. And then I'm going to drive them to school and so on and so on.
Right.
And then the third view is to then say, how do I want to be in each of these situations?
Mm-hmm.
What's the mood I want to have with my kids at breakfast? We have a lunchtime meeting coming up. How do I want to be?
Right.
I'm going to my kids' soccer game after work, and my their mother's going to be there with her new boyfriend.
Right.
How do I want to handle that?
Right.
And so when we get to do that, if there's a part that's kind of tricky because there's so many things going on, we can see, how can I get through this? How do I do this? And I might learn I need to juggle my schedule around. I book too many things, or I can even say, this meeting is really causing me a lot of stress because I have some issues I want to discuss and it's kind of uncomfortable.
Right.
So before the meeting, I'm going to sit quietly and go through it again and see how I want to be.
Right.
And then before going to sleep at night, spend a minute and go over the day backwards. Start from where you are. If I just was in bed, I just say goodnight to everybody and so on. And then look at the highlights. It's just the highlight one. How did I do at that soccer game? Did I get triggered and become snarky and miserable with my ex, or did I let it go? Was I okay?
Right.
And and so on. And so if we do that, then it's like preparing for a musical. If you play a piece of music, you practice a piece of music, and then after you do it, you look back and think, how did that go?
Exactly. What you do in music is you visualize how you want the concert to go, right?
Exactly. So now make life the concert.
Exactly. And then afterwards, you want to go back and review, hey, how did the concert go? What could we have done better? How can we make it better? And so on. And you're constantly getting better. It's interesting because as you're sharing that, I have a couple of coaches in my life. One has been Jack Canfield, who's played a big role in my life, and a gentleman named Dr. Paul Schilling. And with Dr. Paul, he talks a lot about conscious and non-conscious thinking, right? And when we consciously rehearse the day in the morning and kind of like what you went through, this process you talked about, when you rehearse what your day to be like, you're actually using your conscious mind to send a message to your non-conscious that this is how I want to create my day, right? We've been created beings that are able to have dominion over our space. And so if we use our brains to rehearse how we want to live on a daily basis, we will find that we will actually non-consciously or in a habitual way live that way. And then if we review the day at the end as you're laying down and you're drifting off to sleep, and you kind of create an exercise or listen to something that kind of reminds you to do a daily review of all your highlights, then you're looking at, hey, I did really well here. And maybe it's not a criticism, but what could I have done a little bit better? And then, okay, so tomorrow I'm going to work on that, or I'm going to do this. You will start seeing your life go in a spiral upward because you're actually creating, right, consciously, and then you're handing it over to the non-conscious to have those experiences.
Exactly.
Just like I mean, and we see it all the time in sports, right? Before the game, all the players are on the field, they have their headphones on, and they're doing these movements. They're visualizing the game. They're visualizing every play. They're showing how they're going to catch the ball, and how they're going to run and what they're going to do, so that when they get into the game and they're in the middle of it, their bodies just automatically respond because now they've given those controls over to the non-conscious.
It's such a fascinating thing what you say. If you're playing a piece of music,
yes,
you can practice, you do all your notes, you do your chords, you do all these things you need to do. And then when you play, it moves into this magical world that just happens.
Exactly. Well, what you have to do is you consciously think through all the mechanics of it, and you practice it over and over again, and you're basically putting it in your body.
Yeah.
So that when
you think of somebody in jazz, like the great stuff of people doing their solos.
Yes.
Or Ella Fitzgerald doing her scat stuff.
Yes.
Where she picked up back where she started. It's somehow in there. And it didn't come out of her never having practiced it. She really worked at it.
Exactly. And she's also communicating with the rest of the band. And if they're really in tune with her, they're picking up on where she wants to go. And if you start feeling like, oh, wait a minute, this whole thing is creating momentum, and they're all moving as one, and they're not even looking at each other, and they hadn't even rehearsed that. It just begins to happen. It's an amazing experience that we're much more spiritual beings and living at a higher level if we allow ourselves to.
Yeah. Yeah. So we get to play the music of life.
Yes.
And the part that's wonderful is that when you play an instrument, you have so much talent to be able to play. Well, now the instrument that we're playing is being ourselves.
Right.
And we have all the talent it takes in the world. We just have to be who we want to be our best self.
Exactly. When you wrote your book, what is one of the things that you really want people to walk away with from some of the things that you wrote? Because obviously, I love the way you have the chapters as a prescription, right? Different types of prescriptions. What was some of the things that you really wanted people to walk away with?
Well, one that I start with is an appreciation that real thinking includes the intellect, our normal scientific thinking. It also includes the heart. Now, when you think with the heart, what you do is through your caring and compassion, you can picture life from another person's perspective. You can see their challenges from their perspective. And then you ask, how do I serve them?
Right.
What do I do that'll help them? If you do that, sometimes as a physician, you come up with real answers. But as a friend, it just is sometimes being there for them.
Yeah.
Through that, there are amazing bonds. And in every situation, if you think that way, then what you're doing is you're living in the moment fully in every situation.
Right.
The second thing is I got to appreciate through pediatrics how important love is to the human psyche. And it's as solid and as real as anything in the physical world. If I were to drop a boulder on a stone, the boulder would get crushed. If I don't feel loved, my psyche gets crushed.
Right.
And that love is something that is part of our birthright. Even if we had a miserable childhood, we can connect with love. And I describe how we can do that.
Right.
Then describe how love is actually a spiritual path. If our aim is to do the most loving thing in each situation, and that doesn't mean that we're giving up ourselves, because we also have our intellect as part of it.
Right.
So if suppose there's a dog drowning, you might realize that you really want to go in and save them. But if you do that, there's a whirlpool. You need a different way to work it out because you won't make it, you'll die. Right. So there's a place where we use our intellect to say, no, I can't extend myself that far.
Right.
And so we have that balance of our hearts and our minds working together. Then we have it all. It's playing the high notes and the low notes of life.
Yes.
So then in the chapters, in one chapter, I go through healing childhood hurts.
Yes.
Because so many suffer and it then marks their life.
Right.
And then I talk about how do we become less worried? Because worry doesn't solve a problem. How do we become less worried? How do we work with our emotions so that they serve us? And then how do we have better relationships?
Exactly. I want to go back to something that you just said. And I have basically two more areas I want to talk about before we conclude here. And that is healing childhood hurts. Because, again, working with my coaches, and I believe that coaching is the HOV lane of life and success, where when you find the right tour guide as a coach, they can really help you move further along in life than if you were trying to do it by yourself. But with the childhood hurts, one of the things that I've discovered is that if you have a childhood hurt, right, or something that happened to you early on in life, whether it's your childhood or as an adult and now you're an older adult, whatever that is, if you haven't dealt with it, like actually embraced it, faced it, talked to it, just really handled it, it doesn't go away. And it becomes a ceiling or a block in your progress of life. And
it's the filter, how you see yourself and see the world. If you feel you're unloved and unlovable, you have a miserable life.
Exactly. What's interesting, though, is that if you are able, through your words, and whether you're talking to another person or you've discovered the process, to sit down with that part of you that felt that hurt and unpack that, right? And kind of experience that hurt again and say, what happened in that situation and what am I supposed to learn from that? And listen internally to what comes up from you, you're able to embrace it, address it, and eventually move on, still respecting that hurt was there. But there's something about paying attention and honoring that hurt and hearing it out, and then discovering the pains and the lessons that you need to learn from it that allows you to heal from it. And that without...
Yeah, and I look at it a little bit differently. there's that part, and I'll show you where that part fits in the way I see it.
Okay.
But the main thing that happens, let me describe something in the hospital.
Okay.
I would see newborns, and I would see newborns in the newborn intensive care unit. Suppose there's a baby who has a heart problem, and it's known they'll need surgery right after delivery.
Right.
The amount of love that goes out for that kid is unbelievable. You love me more than the healthy kid. And the kid didn't deserve it. He's even in the negative column.
Right.
So there's something to the idea of being loved is part of our birthright.
Right.
Now, if it turns out in that situation that kid's parents were taken away or something happened to them and there were new parents who were creeps, that doesn't change the amount of love that kid deserves.
Right.
So when we got abused during childhood, there was a girl in my practice who lived with her dad. Her mom left the family. She was 15 when I first saw her. The mom left the family when she was an infant. The dad essentially raised her. And she was cared for by a grandmother and the grandmother's boyfriend. And they drank a lot, and they were very nasty toward this kid. They told her that she was worthless. She'd never amount to anything. She was terrible. They were sorry she was born.
Wow.
So that kid would grow up psychologically destroyed.
Right.
While her father loved her and there was all this misery and so on, she's the perfect setup for having an abusive relationship.
Right.
She would accept somebody who loved her and somebody who was mean to her. And so the key for her letting go of this one is to realize that what they said had nothing to do with her.
Right.
It was their issues. It wasn't hers. So one part is to say none of that stuff is true.
Yep.
Then the second part is to reconnect with love and to know that love is transcendent and available. Even if you didn't get it as a childhood, you can fill yourself with love. And I give steps for how you can do that.
Right.
But you can feel love because it's across cultures, it's across generations, it exists. And one simple way you can do that, if you picture a time where you ever felt love in your life,
yep.
Suppose it was petting your kitten. Let go of the circumstances over time and just feel that experience.
Yeah.
And start to feel yourself with that experience. And spend time, know that you deserve to be loved, that you are loved. And then this part of what did I learn? Then when you then look at the rest of your life, then there's a lot you have to heal. You have to heal because you lived this way. You were in miserable situations. You weren't acting at your best. You got into all kinds of trouble. And then you say, okay, I've got to get better at how I feel about myself now. So it's a two-part one of seeing what the pain is, but there's also saying that what happened wasn't true. I need to separate myself out.
Exactly. Brian Katie, in her book, she talks a lot about how do you deal with those limiting beliefs? And one of the questions that you ask yourself when you keep having these negative thoughts is it true? Anyone ever tell me that? And then many times, and I've seen it in my own life, where you have a limiting belief, or basically just call it a limiting belief. And you go ask yourself that question, where did I hear that from? Who told me that? And you realize that no one ever told you that. It was something that through different scenarios and situations, you came to a conclusion about something and made up a story to make sense of it. But no one ever told you that that was the way it was. You just kind of created this scenario. And so,
and even if it happened though as a child, that you weren't told that you were terrible, you weren't told that you were worthless, you'd never amount to anything. You have to say, wait a second, that is not about me.
Exactly.
That's about that person's issues. It's like the jaws of life. I've got to separate myself from the accident, and then I can start to heal.
Exactly. I greatly appreciate that. Well, listen, let me ask you one other thing about your book. There's one other section that really got to me as I read it, and that was you had a group of teenagers or young kids that were pretty happy, and you wanted to know who did they see as their role model or who did they look up to? And most of them said that they looked up to their mom and dad, and that really surprised you. And then you brought the mom and dad in, and that surprised them, but they had the same response. Can you share a little bit more about that? I just thought that was an interesting part of the story.
So I thought to myself, here's this group of teenagers that get along with their parents. Back in the day, I was thinking, if you read Time magazine, they wouldn't describe teenagers in that relationship.
Right.
So I thought, let me find out what the deal is. So first I asked them to pick a hero to make sure I was on the right track. That's when they picked their parents. Except one girl picked Martin Luther King Jr. when I said it didn't have to be a person who was living. So then I said to them, what is it in your relationship that works? Like, why do you get along so well with your parents?
Right.
And they gave me the perfect teenage answer. I don't know. So during visits, I sometimes also have the parents in the room.
Right.
I said to the parent, look, you guys look like you have a great relationship. That's fairly unusual. What works? What's the secret? And they told me the same thing. So I thought, okay, I've got to figure this out for myself. And the way I figured this out is it was quite fortuitous, but every once in a while, I would ask parents when I'm with kids to tell me the strongest qualities in this kid. What are the qualities and traits that will stand the test of time?
Mm.
And in these kids, I saw the parents kind of looked at them and kind of read their answer as they looked at them. They'd say, he's kind. He's such a solid, strong friend. She's so creative. She's so caring. She's so thoughtful. And I thought, wow, these parents see more in their children than even their children recognize.
Right.
If somebody feels that way about you, that's someone you respect, that's someone you're close to, that's someone you can talk to. And you can imagine that if these kids then asked their parents a question or had a discussion, the parents would be interested in hearing their opinions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I thought of kids on the contrast,
yes,
who were rejected from their parents, whose parents didn't think much of them. Kids wouldn't go to them, they'd go to their peers.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's to love our kids as they are and appreciate who they are and say, how can I nurture them?
Yep.
How do I serve them? And not in a way that is doting on them. How do I make them real? But also, how do I make sure I keep my eye on that special glint?
Exactly. Exactly. That's such a true way of how the impact that we can have as adults on children or even people that we mentor. It's kind of like there was a study done with teachers where the teacher was given a child and they were told, oh, this kid is a straight A student. He's the smartest person. He's really good. He may get a little off, but he's really smart. And the teacher's expectation and mindset towards the child was, hey, you're really smart. I know that you're really smart. And they treated them that way, and the child performed that way. But then if the teacher was told, hey, this kid's in a lot of trouble, there's always going to be a problem, blah, 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 and the teacher began to treat the child that way, the child performed that way. And so many times, just kind of like thinking about that part of what you were talking about with the parents, that when we see our kids and we treat them the way we see them and what we want from them and really giving them our best, that our belief in them can help raise them to another level.
Exactly. It's like you go towards the draft. It's like it's this love that pulls you up to be there.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Ron, how can people learn more about you? Where can they go? And how can they get your book?
So my book is available anywhere. You can get it through Amazon. It's Bigger Hearted, a retired pediatrician's prescriptions for living a happier life. And my website is biggerhearted.com. There's a lot that's there. I'm developing my social media platforms. I do workshops. I do seminars. So come on by.
Excellent. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation, pre-interview and during the interview.
I can't believe it's over already. It's fun chatting with you.
I have really enjoyed talking with you and just learning about your book and the things that you've done and all the stories. And again, I can say in this interview, not only did I hear you, but I felt your compassion, your love for the work that you've done and the impact that it's had on you. And I'm sure the impact that it's had on your patients. So thank you so much for being on the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you. And your interest in growth and well-being is so evidenced by who you are.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Be well now.
If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.